scraping away the seagrass, we can make out cleanly carved grooves and channels that seem to have been cut by tools, rather than worn down by the wheels of carts. Where the cart ruts end, we drop off the edge of the underwater plateau and follow a vertical wall down to a depth of 80 feet. We come to the entrance of a cave. The ceiling appears to have been artificially squared off. Even more interesting is the internal architecture of the cave. In a sheltered position, unexposed to waves, currents, or other erosive forces, there are a series of right-angled ledges that again appear to have been made by man. It's a very interesting cave down there, with a squared off entrance. And caves with squared off entrances are found above water all over Malta, and they've been lived in for thousands of years. We're finding undoubtedly man-made submerged cart ruts at about 6 meters here on the section of the island that's rising. That means those cart ruts are extremely old, and I think it casts into question the whole interpretation and the whole dating of the cart rut phenomenon on Malta. 11,000 years ago, the cart ruts would have stood above water. At that time, much of the world was still gripped in the Ice Age deep freeze. But perhaps not Malta. Increasingly, scientists are coming to the view that Malta was a subtropical haven at the end of the Ice Age. Evidence for this is coming from a group of geologists in Durham in the north of England. I took a trip there to find out whether they could shed light on Malta's mysterious underwater structures. Dr. Glenn Milne builds state-of-the-art computer models of the Earth as it looked thousands of years ago. It turns out that 15,000 years ago, Malta's southerly latitude meant it enjoyed a relatively temperate climate. Crucially back then, sea level was far lower, and much of what is now the seabed was above water. Malta was part of a large landmass joined to the island of Sicily 50 miles away.
The orange areas show the part of the land that was exposed about 20,000 years ago. All that area was flooded within about 10,000 years. There's a couple of periods where we had quite a sharp jump in sea level, one at about 14,000 years ago, and one at roughly 11,500 years ago. You're talking about a period of Earth history that's very cold, so people are going to go from northerly latitudes to more southerly latitudes. So they're going to migrate towards the equatorial regions where you see a lot of this land is exposed.
If we take all of these areas that were exposed at the peak of the Ice Age and we add them together, because they're all now underwater, how much land was lost?
That's roughly about 25 million square kilometers, about 10 million square miles.
Wow.
Yeah, it's phenomenal. Loss of land area.
It's an area in total that's the size of Australia, Canada and America put together.
So here you can see the coastline geometry in the Western Mediterranean around 16,000 years ago. And as you progress from about 16,000 years to 14,000 years, keeping an eye on the land bridge between Malta and Sicily, you can see that between those time periods, Malta and Sicily break off from one another. Right there.
Okay, well let's look at the next map.
So we're going from about 14.5 to
now
13.5. You see a huge change.
Yeah, for me that is a very big change. A very large area of land here to the east of Malta has been lost. It's difficult to say with the resolution. We're probably looking at the three Maltese islands, Malta, Camino and Gozo, being joined into one still at that point. But it's beginning to take on its modern character.
It's becoming recognizable.
So Malta was a much bigger place then than it is now. Yet archaeologists pay no attention to its lost Ice Age lands. I think it's very possible that the cart ruts and the rumoured remains of underwater temples are all part of a forgotten Ice Age civilization. If we could recover this heritage, archaeologists will be forced to reassess the origins of Malta's extraordinary temple builders, perhaps even of civilization itself. The whole atmosphere of today's capital of Malta, Valletta, can stand as a metaphor for all the mystery and intrigue of this ancient Mediterranean stronghold. Down through the thousands of years, so many different peoples have been here. The ancient Egyptians, the Greeks, the Phoenicians, the Romans, the Crusaders, each with their secrets. Valletta's Museum of Archaeology contains a magnificent collection of artifacts. The spiral designs from various temple bases are very similar to those I've seen in Hancock in France and elsewhere in megalithic Europe. But many of the sculptures here look like they belong to a much earlier time. The archaeologists call them fat ladies, for obvious reasons. Or the Venuses of Malta, or mother goddesses. They're the central religious symbols of the great megalithic temples of Malta. Archaeology situates these figures in the Neolithic, about 5,000 years ago. What they remind me of is the art of Stone Age Europe, 15, 20, even 30,000 years ago, where we find the same mother goddess figures. The Venus of Willendorf from Austria, 50,000 years old. The figure of Moravia, 27,000 years old. So whatever the age of the megalithic temples themselves, I feel sure that we're dealing with a very ancient religious symbol here, with its roots deep, deep in the past. Here in Malta, they're taught that the first people only arrived around 5200 BC, but could a forgotten Ice Age civilization have been here before that? The problem with stone artifacts, temples or statues, is that they can't be carbon dated directly because they contain no organic materials. So in the last few decades, the age of stone monuments has been established by carbon dating remains in wood and bone and other organic materials found close to them. In Malta now, some of the most senior archaeologists, such as Professor Anthony Bonanno, are beginning to recognize that the cultures they're uncovering here may date back much further than previously thought.
There are some indications that man could have reached Malta before 5000 BC. As a matter of fact, one should remember that during the Ice Age there were periods when the islands were not islands at all, but where the higher land that extended from Italy, incorporating Sicily, as well as the Maltese islands. So that rendered physically possible for man to cross over to the island, as in fact so many animals did at the same time. The problem is that the evidence so far